The air in our penthouse condominium was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive champagne. It was a suffocatingly sweet smell, the kind that clings to the back of your throat. From my spot near the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled below, a glittery tapestry of a million tiny lives, all oblivious to the fact that mine was about to be torn apart. Tonight was our 20th wedding anniversary. 20 years. A lifetime. August, my husband, stood in the center of the room, a glass of champagne held aloft. He was a portrait of success, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed, his tailored suit screaming wealth and power. He had the same charming smile he'd had the day I met him, a smile that could coax secrets from a statue. I once thought that smile was reserved for me. I was a fool. Our guests, a curated collection of business partners, society friends, and his fawning family, applauded as he spoke. "To Virginia," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "The woman who has been by my side for 2 incredible decades." I smiled, a practiced, hollow gesture I had perfected over the years. I felt a familiar pang in my chest, the ghost of a love that had long since withered. His mother, Marilyn, sat on a plush armchair near the front, her eyes gleaming with a strange, triumphant light. She looked like a predator who had just cornered her prey. Her perfectly manicured hand patted the empty space beside her, a silent command for August's new protégée, a young woman named Chloe with bright eyes and an ambition that felt like a blade. August's speech continued, weaving a tale of our beautiful life, our shared journey. It was a masterpiece of fiction. The truth was a much uglier story, one of silence, secrets, and a slow, creeping coldness that had settled deep in the bones of our marriage. 20 years is a significant milestone, he said, his eyes finally locking onto mine across the room. There was no warmth in them. Only a chilling finality. It's a point where a man has to take stock. To reflect on what he's built, and what he needs for the future. A nervous ripple went through the crowd. This wasn't the usual toast. I felt my breath catch. Marilyn's smile widened ever so slightly. He set his champagne glass down on a small table with a soft click. From his inner jacket pocket he withdrew a crisp, folded set of documents. An envelope. My blood turned to ice. He walked towards me, his steps measured and deliberate, parting the sea of our stunned guests. He stopped right in front of me, the city lights behind him creating a cruel halo. "So, for our 20th anniversary, Virginia," he announced, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "I have a special gift for you." He held out the envelope. I didn't take it. My hands felt like lead at my sides. "It's a gift of freedom," he continued, a smirk playing on his lips. "For both of us." He dropped the papers into my limp hand. The words on top were stark and black. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." A collective gasp filled the room. The celebratory music suddenly felt like a funeral dirge. 20 years is long enough, August declared, his voice hard, stripped of all its earlier charm. He gestured vaguely at me as if dismissing a piece of old furniture. "I need someone young now. Someone with life, with ambition. And you," he looked me up and down, his gaze filled with a disgust that physically hurt. "You need to be out of the house by tomorrow." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the frantic, terrified thumping of my own heart. Out of the house. Why, house? The home my parents had bought for me as a wedding gift. The deed signed over to me long before I had foolishly added his name to it years later in a misplaced act of trust. He seemed to have forgotten that crucial detail. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. I glanced at Marilyn. Her face was a mask of serene satisfaction. She had won. She had always hated me, always seen me as an obstacle to her son's true potential. Everyone was staring at me, their faces a mixture of pity, horror, and morbid curiosity. They were waiting for me to shatter. To scream. To cry. To fall to my knees and beg. August stood there, smug and triumphant, expecting a scene. Expecting tears. But the tears wouldn't come. In that moment of absolute betrayal, something cold and hard crystallized in my chest. The years of quiet suffering, of being diminished and ignored, coalesced into a single point of terrible diamond-hard clarity. I lifted my gaze from the papers and met his. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his cruelty hang in the air for every single one of his friends and partners to witness. And then I did something no one expected. I smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It wasn't a broken one. It was a slow, deliberate curving of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. My eyes held a chilling promise, a darkness he had never seen before. A darkness he and his mother had so carefully cultivated. I took a single step closer to him, my voice a low, steady whisper that somehow carried through the entire silent room. "You really should have read the fine print, August," I murmured, my smile widening just a fraction. "Not just on the divorce papers, but on everything." His smug expression faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand. But Marilyn did. I saw it in the way the color drained from her face, the way her smug smile vanished, replaced by a sudden, stark terror. He knew. She knew what I was talking about. And in that moment she understood that the game she had been playing for 20 years had just ended. And a new one, a much more dangerous one, was about to begin. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. The last guest scurried out as if fleeing a burning building, their whispers trailing behind them like smoke. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing us in the tomb our home had just become. The scent of lilies was now cloying, funereal. Half-eaten canapés and abandoned champagne flutes littered the tables, monuments to a celebration that had died a violent death. August stood by the bar, pouring himself a stiff scotch. He didn't offer me one. I was no longer a guest in his life. I was an obstacle to be removed. "Well," he said, not looking at me. "That was dramatic. You always did have a flair for the theatrical, Virginia." The condescension in his voice was a familiar sting. For years he dismissed my feelings, my passions, my very essence as theatrics. My love for art, my quiet afternoons spent reading, my deep emotional responses to the world. All were trivialized, painted as the silly hobbies of a woman with too much time on her hands. I didn't rise to the bait. The woman who would have dissolved into tears was gone, incinerated in the fire of his public humiliation. In her place stood someone I barely recognized, a woman forged in ice and resolve. "Theatrics," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. I walked over to the marble island in the center of the kitchen, the divorce papers still clutched in my hand. I smoothed them out, the crinkling sound echoing in the cavernous silence. "I would call it a public execution, August. And you were the executioner." He finally turned, his face a mask of irritation. "Don't be ridiculous. This has been coming for years. We've been living as roommates, nothing more. I did you a favor by being direct. No messy arguments, no drawn-out misery. A favor." The laugh that escaped my lips was a dry, brittle thing. "You call detonating my life in front of 50 people a favor?" "I call it efficiency," he shot back, his voice rising. "I'm starting a new life. With Chloe. She's vibrant, she's driven. She understands my world. And I won't have you lingering in the background, a sad reminder of a past that's over. I want a clean break." Chloe. The young intern at his architectural firm. I'd seen the way he looked at her during company dinners, the paternalistic hand on her shoulder that lingered a second too long. I told myself it was nothing. I had been a fool not just for 20 years but every single day of them. "So you want me out by tomorrow," I said, my tone flat, transactional. "That's right," he said, taking a gulp of his scotch. "The lawyers have it all sorted. You'll get a generous settlement, more than fair. You can find a nice little apartment somewhere. Start over." He said it so casually, as if discussing the relocation of a potted plant. A nice little apartment. I looked around the sprawling penthouse. At the curated art on the walls, chosen by me. The custom-built bookshelves sagging under the weight of my father's collection. The hand-woven Persian rug my parents had gifted us for our first anniversary. Every corner of this place held a memory, a piece of my soul. And he thought he could just evict me from my own life. "There's just one problem with your efficient plan, August," I said, leaning my hands on the cool marble. "And what's that?" he scoffed. "This condo," I said, tapping the countertop with a single finger. "You seem to be under the impression that it's yours to kick me out of." He stared at me, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his features. "Of course it is. Our names are on the deed. It's a marital asset." "Yes," I agreed softly. "I did add your name. About 10 years ago, remember? You said it would make you feel like we were true partners. But the original deed, the one from 20 years ago, was a wedding gift. From my parents. To me. The color began to drain from his face. A slow, satisfying process. His arrogance was a fortress, but I had just found a crack in the foundation. That doesn't matter, he stammered, his bravado wavering. The courts will split it. Perhaps, I said. But it will be messy. It will be complicated. And it certainly won't be done by tomorrow morning. You can serve me with divorce papers, August, but you cannot serve me with an eviction notice. This is my home. He slammed his glass down, the scotch sloshing over the rim. You're going to fight me on this? After everything? You're going to be petty? Petty? I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I walked towards him, closing the distance until I could see the fine lines of panic around his eyes. You built an empire. August Thorne, the visionary architect who reshaped the city's skyline. But you and I, we both know who the real visionary was, don't we? His face went rigid. The flicker of confusion in his eyes morphed into something else. Fear. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice tight. Don't you? I smiled, that same cold smile from before. The Thorne Tower. The waterfront project. The Meridian Plaza. Your greatest hits. All built on a foundation of, what was it your mother used to call my father's work? Imaginative but impractical scribbles. Funny how those scribbles became so practical after he died. A vein pulsed in his temple. Your father was a brilliant man. I've always said that. He was a mentor. He was more than a mentor, I whispered, the words like chips of ice. He was your blueprint. And I think it's time everyone saw the original designs. He was speechless. For the first time in 20 years, I had rendered August Thorne utterly, completely speechless. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the gears in his brilliant, deceitful mind grinding to a halt. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, the ghost of my father's genius hanging between us. I went into our bedroom, my bedroom, and locked the door. My legs finally gave out and I slid down the cool wood to the floor, the divorce papers crumpling in my fist. The cold resolve that had carried me through the confrontation finally cracked, and a single hot tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of rage. The game had just begun, and I was no longer playing by his rules. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds, casting long, skeletal shadows across the bedroom. I hadn't slept. Sleep felt like a luxury I could no longer afford, a surrender. Instead, I had spent the night in the silent, cavernous closet, surrounded by the ghosts of my life with August. His suits, smelling faintly of his cologne and deceit, hung next to my dresses, each one a memory of a party, a dinner, a lie. By sunrise, a plan was beginning to form, sharp and dangerous in my mind. It wasn't enough to expose him for stealing my father's work. That was just the surface, the part of the iceberg visible above the water. The true betrayal, I suspected, lay much deeper in the dark, cold depths where the real monsters lurked. My father, Julian Croft, had been an architect of quiet genius. He didn't chase fame or fortune. He chased ideas, sketching fantastic, gravity-defying structures on napkins and legal pads. He saw buildings as living things, expressions of the human spirit. August had been his star apprentice, a young man with charm and ambition, but little true vision. He'd shadowed my father for years, absorbing everything. Then came the accident. A scaffolding collapse at a construction site for a small experimental building my father was overseeing. It was ruled a tragic freak accident. A safety harness malfunction. August had been there that day. He'd been the one to pull my father's broken body from the wreckage, playing the part of the grieving, devastated protégé. He inherited my father's small firm, and within a few years, using a portfolio of new designs, he transformed it into the corporate behemoth it was today. I had been too lost in my own grief at the time to question the details. I was 22, my world had collapsed, and August was there to pick up the pieces, to hold me, to comfort me, to marry me. Now 20 years later, his cruelty had given me a terrible gift: clarity. I slipped out of the bedroom. August was gone. A single suitcase was missing from his side of the closet. He had fled to his new life, leaving me to pack up the old one. He'd left a note on the kitchen island. Virginia, my lawyers will be in touch. Don't make this ugly. I laughed, a humorless sound that echoed in the empty penthouse. Oh, August, I whispered to the silent room. You have no idea what ugly is. My target was my father's old study. When we moved into the penthouse after his death, I had insisted on recreating it exactly. August had called it morbid, but I couldn't bear to let that part of him go. It was a room he rarely entered. He said it was too full of ghosts. Now I knew he was just afraid of the evidence. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and turpentine. It was a scent that brought a sharp, painful wave of nostalgia. I ran my hand over the scarred surface of his drafting table. His designs were all meticulously filed away in tall metal cabinets. August had archived them for me years ago. I pulled open a drawer labeled, Conceptual Unfinished. It was filled with dozens of portfolios. I spent hours, my hands growing dusty, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. And then I found it. A thick, leather-bound portfolio tucked away at the very back, mislabeled, City Parks and Rec Proposals. My breath hitched. Inside weren't plans for parks. They were the genesis of every major project August had ever built. There it was, the soaring, twisted spire of the Thorn Tower, sketched in my father's familiar, elegant hand, with notes in the margin about wind shear and load-bearing dynamics. There were the initial schematics for the waterfront project, a revolutionary design using reclaimed materials, an idea August had claimed as his own eco-friendly innovation. Page after page, a ghost-written history of August's entire career. But it was the last page that made the blood drain from my face. It was a preliminary sketch for the very building where my father had died. It was a small, complex design, and at the bottom in my father's handwriting was a chilling note, dated the day before his death. August concerned about the support strut integrity on the west scaffolding. Says it's a waste of time and money to double-check the welds. I told him safety is never a waste. He seemed angry. I'll inspect it myself first thing in the morning. I dropped the portfolio. The pages scattered on the floor. A cold, creeping dread, slick and oily, filled me. It wasn't a freak accident. It was a malfunction. A malfunction August had been warned about. A malfunction he had dismissed. A malfunction that had occurred on the very scaffolding my father went to inspect personally because his ambitious protege had cut corners. Was it just negligence? Or was it something more? Had August, seeing his opportunity, knowing my father was going up there, simply let it happen? Had he watched the man who mentored him, the man whose genius he was about to steal, fall to his death? The thought was so monstrous, so utterly evil that I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just about a stolen career anymore. This was about a stolen life. My father's life. My eyes fell on a small locked wooden box on my father's desk, one I hadn't opened in years. It held his personal effects, things the police had returned to us after the accident. His keys, his wallet, and a small pocket-sized notebook. I'd never been able to bring myself to read it. It was too painful. My hands trembled as I found the key and opened the box. The notebook was worn, the cover soft from use. I flipped it open. It was filled with his usual observations, notes on materials, sketches, thoughts on light and shadow. But tucked into a small pocket in the back cover was a folded, yellowing piece of paper. It was a carbon copy of a materials invoice. A purchase order for the steel support struts for the west scaffolding. It was signed and approved not by my father but by August. And next to the item description, there was a handwritten note from the supplier. Per A. Thorne's instructions, supplied grade B steel non-structural, instead of specified grade A. Significant cost savings. Please confirm this deviation from original spec. There was no confirmation. My father had never seen it. August had bypassed him, ordered cheaper, weaker materials, and then argued against the very safety checks that would have exposed his deceit. This was it. This was the proof. This was the weapon. My grief, which had been a dull ache for 20 years, was now sharpened into a blade. My revenge would not just be about taking back my home or my father's legacy. It would be about taking August's freedom. The next few days were a blur of caffeine-fueled purpose. August sent a few curt texts asking when I would be vacating the property. I ignored them. Let him wonder. Let him grow anxious. The fear of the unknown would be his first taste of the helplessness he had inflicted upon me. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed a lawyer, but not one of the sharks from August's world, Men in $1,000 suits who traded favors over steak dinners. I needed someone hungry, someone who saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. I found him through a legal aid referral service. His name was Ben Carter, and his office was a cramped, cluttered space above a bakery, a world away from the gleaming glass towers where August conducted his business. Ben was young, maybe 30, with tired eyes that had seen too much and a rumpled suit that had seen better days. He looked at me, sitting across his cluttered desk, and I could see the skepticism in his eyes. A rich woman from a penthouse, crying foul. "Mrs. Thorne," he began, his voice weary. "Divorces in your world can be contentious. If this is about securing a larger settlement." "This isn't about the settlement," I cut him off, my voice sharp. I pushed the leather portfolio across the desk. "It's about this." He opened it, his eyebrows raising slightly at the quality of the drawings. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from detached professionalism to rapt attention. He was a smart man, he saw it immediately. He compared the dates on my father's sketches with the completion dates of August's most famous buildings. "This is a remarkable collection," he said, his voice now laced with intrigue. "But proving intellectual property theft after 20 years is an uphill battle. Your husband will claim collaboration inspiration." "I know," I said. I slid the yellowed invoice and my father's pocket notebook across the desk. "But it's not just about the buildings anymore. It's about how he got the chance to build them." Ben read the note in the journal. Then he examined the invoice, his tired eyes widening. He looked from the papers back to me, and for the first time he saw me not as a scorned socialite, but as a daughter seeking justice. A quiet, dangerous gravity settled in the small office. "Grade B steel for a primary support scaffold?" he whispered, more to himself than to me. "That's not just cutting corners. That's criminally negligent." "I think it was more than negligence," I said, my voice cold. "I think it was an opportunity." Ben leaned back in his creaking chair, staring at the documents as if they were a live grenade. "If we can prove he knowingly and willfully used substandard materials that directly led to your father's death, we could petition the DA to reopen the case. This moves from a civil suit to a criminal investigation. Manslaughter. At the very least." A grim satisfaction settled in my stomach. "Good," was all I said. Our strategy was two-pronged. Ben would start the legal process, quietly filing motions and preparing a case to present to the district attorney's office. My job was subtler, more insidious. I was going to become the ghost in August's machine, the unseen force that would dismantle his empire from the inside out. I started with his company, Thorne Architecture. I still had a small number of shares in the company from the inheritance, not enough to have any real power, but enough to grant me access to shareholder reports and internal communications. I spent my nights poring over financial statements, project proposals, and investor briefings. August ran his business like he ran his life, with a veneer of perfection hiding a rotten core. He was over-leveraged, with massive loans taken out against the projected income of his new flagship project, the Phoenix Tower, a skyscraper that was set to be the tallest on the West Coast. It was his crowning achievement. And it would be his tomb. Using an anonymous email address and a burner phone, I began to leak information. Not to the press. That would be too loud, too obvious. I sent it to the people who mattered, the investors. A single encrypted email to the primary hedge fund backing the Phoenix Tower, containing a scanned copy of my father's original design for a strikingly similar, but structurally superior, tower. The subject line was simple: due diligence. Another email to a notoriously scrupulous board member of his second biggest lender, this one containing August's history of cutting costs on materials, subtly referencing past projects where safety inspectors had been persuaded to sign off on questionable work. I didn't need to provide hard proof, just the seed of doubt. Men who played with billions of dollars were notoriously risk-averse. Then I turned my attention to Marilyn. She was the gatekeeper of August's social and financial world, a venomous spider sitting at the center of a web of influence. She controlled board appointments, chaired the city's most powerful charities, and wielded gossip like a weapon. She had been my tormentor for 20 years. Her soft-spoken insults and backhanded compliments designed to erode my confidence, to make me feel small and unworthy of her precious son. I remembered something she'd said years ago at a dinner party, bragging about her family's long history in the city. The Thorne family has been building this city for 100 years, she preened. Our roots are deep. I started digging. Not into August's roots but into hers. Her maiden name was Prescott. I spent days in the city archives, scrolling through microfiche of old newspapers and property records. For a family with such deep roots, their history was surprisingly murky. And then I found it. A series of articles from the 1950s about a massive construction and zoning scandal. A number of city officials were indicted for taking bribes to rezone residential areas for lucrative commercial development. Entire neighborhoods were bulldozed. The mastermind behind the scheme, a developer who got away clean, using his political connections to avoid indictment, was a man named Charles Prescott, Marilyn's father. The scandal had ruined hundreds of families, but the Prescotts had emerged wealthier than ever. They had built their fortune on the wreckage of other people's lives. It was the family business. I now understood Marilyn's obsession with August's success. It wasn't just about motherly pride. It was about continuing the family legacy of acquiring power and wealth, no matter the human cost. Her complicity in August's cruelty wasn't passive. It was ingrained, inherited. She wasn't just his mother, she was his mentor. I found a list of the families who had lost their homes in the Prescott scandal. Many had moved away but a few were still in the city, their names forgotten by history. I found a grandson of one of those families, a journalist at a small independent online publication known for its investigative work. I sent him an anonymous package. It contained all the evidence of the old scandal, along with a simple typed note. The roots of a poison tree never bear good fruit. It's time to look at what's grown from Charles Prescott's legacy. Start with Thorne architecture. I had planted the seeds. Now all I had to do was wait for them to grow. The penthouse was no longer a cage, it was my war room. And from its windows I watched the city, waiting for the first tremors of the earthquake I had just triggered. A week later the first tremor hit. I was drinking my morning coffee when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Thorne Architecture's Phoenix Tower project faces investor scrutiny amid plagiarism allegations. The article was vague, citing anonymous sources and unconfirmed rumors about the project's design origins. But it was enough. The stock for August's company, which was publicly traded, dipped by 5%. A small tremor, but the seismograph was active. August called, his voice a furious storm. "What did you do, Virginia? Is this you? Leaking nonsense to the press?" "I have no idea what you're talking about, August," I replied, my voice a placid lake. "Perhaps your investors are simply getting cold feet. It's a volatile market." "Don't play dumb with me," he roared. "This has your fingerprints all over it. This is about the condo, isn't it? You're trying to blackmail me into letting you stay." It was astonishing, his narcissism. He couldn't conceive of a motive beyond his own immediate desires. He thought this was a petty squabble over property. He had no idea I was fighting a war for my father's soul. "I'm not the one who needs to worry about a place to live, August," I said calmly and hung up. The next tremor came 2 days later, and it was aimed directly at Marilyn. The online publication ran a long-form exposé titled, "The Foundation of Lies: How the Prescott-Thorne Dynasty Was Built on a Stolen Past." The article painstakingly detailed the zoning scandal of the 1950s, connecting Marilyn's father directly to the families who were displaced. Then it pivoted, drawing a parallel to the current allegations swirling around Thorne architecture, suggesting a pattern of predatory practices passed down from one generation to the next. The story was a bombshell in our small, gossipy social circle. Marilyn's position as the city's moral and charitable compass was instantly compromised. The chair of the museum board called for an emergency meeting. Donors to her pet charities started asking pointed questions. The web she had so carefully woven for decades was beginning to unravel. She arrived at the penthouse that afternoon unannounced. She used her own key, a violation that sent a jolt of anger through me. She found me in my father's study, the portfolio of his original drawings laid out on the drafting table. She didn't look like the triumphant predator from the party. Her face was pale, her perfectly applied lipstick a slash of red against her ashen skin. Her eyes, usually so sharp and mocking, were wide with a fear she couldn't conceal. "What is the meaning of this, Virginia?" she demanded, her voice a low hiss. She waved her phone, the scandalous article displayed on the screen. "This filth. These lies about my father. The truth is rarely clean, Marilyn, I said, not looking up from the drawings. You did this, she accused, stepping further into the room. Her eyes fell on the drawings and she froze. She recognized them. Of course she did. She had seen them in my father's office countless times, back when she and August would come for dinner, their smiles dripping with false affection. You're trying to destroy my son, she whispered, the accusation now laced with a note of pleading. After everything he's done for you. He gave you this life. I finally looked up, my gaze as cold and hard as the steel that should have been in that scaffolding. This life? This gilded cage? This life was bought with my father's genius and paid for with his blood. You knew. You knew all along. Her composure cracked. I knew that your father was a dreamer and my son is a doer. August took those ideas and made them real. He built an empire. What would your father have done with them? Let them gather dust in a drawer. He would have built them with integrity, I shot back. He wouldn't have cut corners. He wouldn't have used cheap materials to save a few dollars, knowing it could cost lives. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. A memory. A flash of pure, unadulterated guilt. The accident. She breathed, her hand flying to her throat. You can't possibly. August wouldn't. Wouldn't he? I stood up, walking around the desk until I was standing directly in front of her. She was a tall woman, but in that moment she seemed to shrink. He was there, Marilyn. He knew the scaffolding was faulty. My father wrote it in his journal. August was worried about delays, about costs. He wanted to move forward. Tell me, did he call you that day? After it happened? What did he say? Her face was a canvas of horror. I could see the memory playing out behind her eyes. The frantic phone call, the terrible confession of a son to his mother. The secret she had helped him keep buried for 20 years. He was distraught, she stammered, her voice trembling. He said it was a terrible, terrible accident. You're a bad liar, Marilyn, I said softly. You always have been. You lie with your smile, with your compliments. But your eyes always tell the truth. You knew he was responsible. Maybe you didn't know all the details, but you knew his ambition, his carelessness, led to my father's death. And you helped him cover it up. You helped him build his new life on top of my father's grave. She stumbled back, knocking into a bookshelf. A framed photo fell to the floor, the glass shattering. It was a picture of a young August and me on our wedding day. Happy, naive, doomed. You have to stop this, she pleaded, the last of her authority gone, replaced by raw desperation. You'll ruin him. You'll ruin everything. He is already ruined, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. He ruined himself 20 years ago and you helped him sweep the evidence under the rug. But the thing about truth, Marilyn, is that it doesn't decay. It just waits. And its patience has run out. I bent down and picked up the broken frame. I carefully removed the photograph of our wedding day, a day that now felt like a scene from someone else's life. I tore it in half, the sound of the ripping paper unnaturally loud in the silent room. I dropped the two pieces at her feet. Get out of my house, I said, my voice a low command. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The serpent had been defanged. She turned and fled, leaving behind the shattered glass and the two halves of a lie. The air in the study felt cleaner, lighter. I had confronted one of the monsters. And now only one remained. The city was on edge. The twin scandals, the whispers of plagiarism and the resurrected ghost of the Prescott zoning conspiracy, had created the perfect storm. August's world, once a fortress of steel and glass, was beginning to show cracks under the pressure. Investors were demanding audits. Board members were calling for transparency. The Phoenix Tower project, his magnum opus, was stalled indefinitely. Ben Carter called me. The DA's office is interested, he said, his voice tight with a nervous energy. The invoice for the substandard steel is a smoking gun. They're opening a preliminary inquiry into your father's death. It's off the record for now, but they're taking it seriously. A cold wave of victory washed over me. It was happening. The gears of justice, rusted from 20 years of disuse, were beginning to turn. August, meanwhile, was becoming more and more unhinged. He left a string of furious, rambling voicemails on my phone, alternating between threats and pathetic pleas for me to see reason. He was a cornered animal and he was about to do something stupid. He did. He called a press conference. It was a desperate, arrogant move. He intended to get in front of the narrative, to paint himself as the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by a bitter, vengeful ex-wife. I watched it streamed live on my laptop, sitting at my father's desk, his drawings spread before me like a battle map. August stood at a podium, a bank of microphones before him, his face pale and strained. His new girlfriend, Chloe, stood a few feet behind him, a deer in the headlights, looking utterly out of her depth. Marilyn was nowhere to be seen. These past few weeks, my family and my company have been the target of baseless, malicious attacks, he began, his voice attempting a tone of wounded dignity. These rumors, circulated by anonymous cowards, are designed to undermine my life's work. They are lies, spun by someone who wishes to see me fail. He went on, denying everything. He claimed the designs were his own, that his collaboration with my father was one of his fondest memories. He dismissed the story about Marilyn's father as ancient history, irrelevant to his business. And I believe I know the source of these attacks, he said, his eyes finding the camera as if he could see me through the screen. My wife, Virginia, from whom I am separated, is unhappy with our divorce proceedings. She is a vindictive woman, attempting to extort a larger settlement from me by destroying my reputation. He was trying to frame me as a greedy, scorned woman. It was the oldest trick in the book. But I had an older one. The truth. While he was speaking, Ben was hand-delivering a package to the lead detective on the newly reopened case. It contained a certified copy of my father's journal, the original invoice, and a detailed timeline of events. He also delivered an identical package to the most tenacious investigative reporter at the city's largest newspaper. As August's press conference reached its crescendo of self-pity, the reporter's phone buzzed. And then another. News alerts began to ripple through the room. The journalists started murmuring, looking at their phones, then back at August with new predatory eyes. The first question came from the reporter I'd targeted. "Mr. Thorne," she called out, her voice sharp. "You claim these are baseless attacks. But we have received documents, including an invoice signed by you, showing you approved the purchase of substandard, non-structural grade steel for the scaffolding that collapsed and killed Julian Croft. Can you comment on that?" The blood drained from August's face. He was blindsided. His carefully constructed narrative crumbled in an instant. That's preposterous," he stammered. "Those documents they must be forgeries." "We've also received excerpts from Mr. Croft's personal journal," another reporter shouted. "Dated the day before his death, in which he states you argued with him about the cost and necessity of safety checks on that very scaffolding. Is that also a forgery?" August stared out at the sea of reporters, his mouth opening and closing. The charming, powerful architect was gone. In his place was a guilty man, naked and exposed under the harsh glare of the lights. Chloe looked at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and horror, finally realizing she had hitched her wagon to a falling star. He couldn't answer. He just stood there, speechless, as the questions rained down on him like hammer blows. He had walked into his own trial, and the verdict was being delivered live for the entire city to see. He turned and fled the podium, shoving past his aides, the reporters swarming after him. I closed my laptop. A profound, quiet stillness filled the study. It wasn't the giddy thrill of victory. It was a heavier, more somber feeling. The feeling of an old, terrible weight finally being lifted. The collapse was no longer calculated. It was in free fall. And I knew exactly where August would land. He came that night. I knew he would. I was waiting for him. The penthouse was dark, save for a single lamp illuminating the drafting table in my father's study. I had arranged the original drawings for the Thorne Tower on its surface, a silent testament to his monumental fraud. The sound of the front door being forced open echoed through the apartment, followed by his heavy, frantic footsteps. He stormed into the study, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild with desperation. He looked like a king whose kingdom had just burned to the ground. "You," he seethed, his voice a raw, ragged whisper. "You did this. You ruined me." "You were already ruined, August," I said, my voice calm. "You were ruined the moment you decided your ambition was worth more than a man's life. My father's life. It was an accident," he screamed, his composure completely gone. He lunged forward, sweeping his arm across the drafting table. The priceless drawings fluttered to the floor like fallen leaves. A tragic, unavoidable accident. Was it an accident when you ordered the cheaper steel? I asked, my voice never rising. Was it an accident when you ignored the supplier's warning? Was it an accident when you argued with my father, telling him a safety check was a waste of money? Each question was a nail in his coffin. He stared at me, his chest heaving. The lies he had told for 20 years were gone. There was only the ugly, naked truth between us. He was holding me back, he finally confessed, the words torn from him. He was a genius, yes, but he had no vision for the future. He wanted to build monuments, not a business. He would have fiddled with those designs forever, never breaking ground. I made them real. I built an empire from his scribbles. And all it cost was everything, I said softly. I gave you everything, he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. This life, the parties, the respect. I gave you all of it. You gave me a cage, I countered, stepping towards him. You took my grief and used it to trap me. You married me to silence any questions, to own my father's legacy as well as his daughter. You diminished me, belittled me, made me feel small so I would never have the confidence to look too closely at the man you really were. But you made one mistake, August. You got comfortable. You thought after 20 years the woman you married was gone for good. You thought she would just cry and disappear. His face contorted, a mask of rage and self-pity. I loved you, Virginia. The words were so obscene, so utterly false that I laughed. It was a full, genuine laugh, and the sound of it seemed to shock him more than my anger. No, you didn't, I said, the last of my laughter dying out. You loved the idea of me. The daughter of Julian Croft. The perfect, quiet, respectable wife who legitimized your stolen throne. You don't know the first thing about love. Love doesn't discard someone after 20 years because they're not new anymore. Love doesn't humiliate and it doesn't betray. He had no answer for that. He just stared at the drawings on the floor, the symbols of his rise and his fall. They're reopening the case, I told him, my voice flat. The police. The DA. It's over. The fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped. The wild rage in his eyes was replaced by a hollow, empty terror. He finally understood. This wasn't about divorce or money or property. This was about justice. The kind that couldn't be bought or bullied away. What do you want, Virginia? He whispered, his voice broken. Tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. I looked at this man, this stranger who I had shared a bed with for 2 decades. I felt nothing. Not hatred, not pity. Just a vast, empty space where a life used to be. I want my father back, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. I want back the 20 years you stole from me, the years I spent loving a ghost and living a lie. But since you can't give me that, I will settle for watching you pay for what you did. As if on cue, the sound of sirens began to rise from the street below, growing steadily closer. Red and blue lights flashed against the windows, painting the room in strobing colors. August heard them. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. He looked at me, then at the door like a cornered rat seeking an escape that wasn't there. You called them, he breathed. I didn't have to, I said. The truth has a way of making its own noise. A firm, heavy knock sounded at the door. Mr. Thorne? This is the police. We have a warrant. Open the door. He looked at me one last time, his face a ruin of disbelief and despair. He had been so sure of his power, so certain of his world. And in the end, it was all brought down by a few pieces of paper and a woman he had long since written off. I didn't watch as they led him away. I didn't need to. I turned my back and began to pick up my father's drawings from the floor, one by one, carefully smoothing out the creases. My hands were steady. The ghosts in the room were finally quiet. The house was mine again.